Welcome to the Making of YOR, a podcast where we turn ideas into game mechanics for our upcoming tabletop RPG, YOR. If you'd like to stay up to date on the developments of YOR, head over to our Discord. Link is in the description. All right, so we've pretty much roughly covered features on the last one, and I think I want to go back to mechanics.
Yeah, let's mix it up a little.
Yeah, we've been working on a lot of base mechanics. We worked on a lot of base mechanics before we started recording.
Yeah.
But I'm interested to touch on trying to remember what it was we talked about.
We talked about like spells and auto hits and
yeah. So like the interaction with spells, auto hits, I think I'm on.
Yeah.
Like I've been back and forth on auto hits, but I think if we keep it auto hitting on basic attacks, especially like the resource generating attacks.
Yeah.
Well, those aren't all attacks, the resource generators. Some of them are, but if we keep it to like simple actions so that if you are just going to do a simple action, we don't have to spend time on it.
No.
And I think when you compare that to D&D, it's cool when you get to do something cool, like cast a big spell and you get to see the effect and all that. And it is essential that you kill the enemy, right? And so your fighter or whatever is just going to probably swing his sword like he always does. And being able to streamline the things that aren't super cool, like casting a cantrip or swinging a sword, and just being like, all right, you do the thing and it happens.
Yeah, you can just do that.
Yeah, and then being able to spend time on the things you might do that are cool and have effects, which isn't going to be just limited to spellcasters.
Absolutely.
You know, we're going to have like we've developed the signature attacks.
And fighter has size up and barbarian has cleave. And
interaction that feels like it changes the game more than just I did some points of damage.
They can interact more broadly with the game world than you can in other game systems.
Yeah, or at least we get to spend more time on those parts of combat and less time on I did a few more points of damage to the boss.
It's all right. I rolled, I hit, I did. Oh, look at that, 3 damage. I'm glad we wasted 5 minutes on this.
Yeah.
And I have had the quickest turn all combat.
Yeah. Yeah, that is, I think that's a big negative in normal combat is the amount of time it takes to get through a combat.
Yeah, we've talked about how if the idea is to minimize the opportunity for players to get on their phones.
Yeah, that's like the crux of the...
Yes.
Like, well, what do we filter this through to determine if it's working? Was there enough time for you to get bored
and get on your phone?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's if we play a whole game of this and nobody gets on their phone to do anything other than look up a rule, I think we have a good game.
I agree. I think that is going to do well, and it's also why we've gone back and forth on the idea of tactical gameplay, but we want ours to be cinematic and not tactical. And not that I don't love tactical. I love tactical gameplay. But
the way we play our game isn't particularly tactical.
It isn't.
Even in D&D, which is a really tactical game.
And the problem is the more tactical, and at least in the way D&D works, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The more tactical that you implement your mechanics in D&D, the less narrative the game feels. Like the less cinematic, if you will. Right?
You're doing cinema. All of a sudden, you're in a video game.
Yeah.
And you're rolling initiative and you're rolling dice and you're tracking 5-foot squares. And
yeah, and
it's immersion breaking.
I think it is. At least from the narrative experience, it's immersion breaking. When you spend 3 hours in combat and then you're supposed to go back to dialogue and you haven't even done your character's voice really in 3 hours because there's been no conversation.
Yeah, because it took you 3 hours to go through, 45 seconds of fight.
Yeah. So if we can streamline combat and who knows, maybe with this whole idea where each side goes.
Yeah, our side-based battle.
Yeah, side-based mechanic battle. That might create more opportunity for character dialogue that's actually occurring in combat. Like inter-party dialogue might occur more often because you're strategizing a little bit.
Yeah, you're trying to come up with combos. We talked about doing, all right, you have different phases in combat, sort of like you do in 40K. You have the planning phase where you guys have like a minute to come up with your plan as a side, and then everybody rolls, and then you have the resolution phase where you figure out how it all comes together. And that gives, the players time to strategize and you, the DM, time to like come up with what the monsters are going to do. And I think that'll not just speed up combat, but streamline combat as well.
Yeah. I don't want combat to not be a significant part of the game. I just don't want combat to dominate. It would be nice if we can bring combat in line to where it takes up about as much time in a session generally
as anything else,
as the other pillars. So with that in mind, we should talk about what we talked about earlier today, which was spell casting. We didn't record that just because it was some like ideas that all came about really quickly.
Shooting the shit while we were waiting on our podcast studio to open up.
Yeah. And so I think that we want to record a little bit of that. So no saves. You cast a spell.
Yeah, we talked about how we don't want offsides rolling. So it's your turn. You're the one who's rolling almost all the dice.
Yeah.
Anything else that somebody can do on not your turn is going to be a reaction, and they're going to be real limited and specific. So that keeps us from like, oh, I forgot it was actually the monster's turn because I actually have a bunch of things that let me do stuff on their turn. So I just went like twice and killed a couple of things and cast a spell, but it's actually still their turn, even though it feels like it's my turn. So we're trying to minimize that as much as possible. We're going to give you like defensive options and stuff, but that's mostly what they'll be on reactions, is defensive options.
Yeah. I think that, and we want to have a lot of possible reactions too. We've actually talked about having a game that has more reactions, but they're not reactions that probably let you do an incredible amount of stuff. They're just a variety of utility.
Yeah, utility, damage, repositioning, tactical type stuff.
Yeah. And the idea of progressive spells.
Yes.
So
like sagas in Magic the Gathering.
Yeah. So you're going to cast, let's say, Hold Person. And your Hold Person might even be... Do we have spell slots opening up at tier 1 for the Magus?
They're cantrips.
They're just cantrips. So at tier 2, you're going to get a few spells.
Mm-hmm.
So you might get something like, we don't know what we're going to call it yet, but it'll be like a Hold Person type thing, right?
Yeah.
And a mobilization.
Yeah, root in place or something. Yeah,
something like that. Something that limits movement. And you're going to take that spell, and when you cast it, let's say it'll either cut their movement in half, or depending on balance, it might take away all their movement. I suspect it won't immobilize them. I suspect it's just going to limit their movement.
Like 5 feet, 10 feet, something.
Because there's no save. So you're guaranteed limiting someone.
Mm-hmm.
And then on your next turn, because that's going to take your action, on your next turn, it's going to take your quick action to maintain that. So you've cast it on them, and now you've maintained this limited movement. And then you're going to use your action, or you can use your action to progress it to the next tier. So you quick action, maintain it, and then you action can progress it to the tier 2. Since you're a tier 2 character, you have spells that allow you to go up to a second tier. And then at that second tier, it might immobilize them, or maybe it just takes away their movement. Now they have no movement and they can't take quick actions.
So they're debuffed more severely than they were at the beginning, less severely than the other, tiers of spell. So we've got 4 tiers. Say they go up tier 2, tier 3. You're a tier 4 spellcaster. You cast your tier 1 Hold Person. Tier 1 slows their movement. Tier 2 stops their movement. Tier 3 probably stops them taking any actions, and Tier 4 might just kill them. But every turn you have to spend your quick action maintaining the spell, and then your regular action improving the spell and intensifying it.
You know, I think, and who knows, we'll think about this. It could be that you have to use your action to maintain it. Depends on the spell. I think depending on which spell it is and how powerful, it might require an action to maintain. And that might be a good way to balance more influential spells, is that it takes an action to maintain it. But I don't know. We initially talked about quick action to maintain because that removes your ability to generate more resource. But if it's a quick action to maintain, now you can cast other spells while maintaining it. So it's a double-sided thing.
Yeah, we'll have to see. But I think all of the classes require resource to cast more spells, so it's self-limiting anyway.
Yes, it is. It will be self-limiting anyway.
We'll have to see how it goes out in playtesting.
Yeah, I think quick action to maintain is probably better because that means all classes will still be able to cast a cantrip or make a basic attack. So I think that is probably better to just do quick action maintain, but we'll see. We'll be able to do some playtesting later and really see how that works out. So I think I'm really excited for that kind of spell casting. It allows us to make some really, really strong spells,
but have really easy balance levers on those spells.
Yeah, and so and also less spells to remember off of a list.
It's D&D. Wizards have, I don't know, 15, 20 spells pretty quickly, and trying to keep all of those in your head, like, all right, I can cast any of these whenever, and I got to have these prepared and these thought up and all that stuff. That's a lot of stuff to keep in your head.
In all likelihood, in our game, when you get to tier 4, which is your height of level, right, that's probably going to equate to roughly a 15
to 20 level character.
Yeah. You're going to have maybe 5 spells, but all of those spells are going to have multiple levels. So in a lot of ways, it's going to feel like 20 spells, but you only have to know 5.
Yeah, like, all right, I know what these 5 do. I know their progression, so I know how they get good after 4 rounds of concentrating or whatever it is we decide to do on them.
Yeah.
So I've got a lot of options, but I only have to remember 5 things.
Yeah. Look, we could be totally wrong, but man, does that sound really good.
Yeah, having played a wizard, that sounds incredible.
Yeah. Well, and especially if you're not like you with 15 years of game TTRPG experience, right? A new player is going to have a much easier time.
Yeah, it's a lot to ask for somebody to remember all those spells, and it's unfair to compare them to my memory.
Yeah. So I like all that. I think I need to make some notes on that later. But what about cover? Do you have any ideas on that? Because we mentioned that we want this to be a very narrative focused experience rather than a tactical.
Yeah.
So,
which basically means being able to play theater of the mind rather than having to have a battle map.
Yeah, exactly. Which is a lot easier for a DM. If you've ever DM'd a game, for all of you that haven't DM'd a game, you're going to be like, well, I don't understand. What is it? You just throw the mat on the ground. No, you do not.
It is so much easier to say, all right, you guys are fighting a group of goblins. There's 3 of them in front of you, rather than, all right, there's 3 here, and set them out on the 5-foot grid. And I need your guys' marching order so I can set them up wherever I need to, so I know exactly how many 5-foot squares y'all are apart. And it's a lot of extra effort.
A lot of extra effort day of, but it's also doubles the amount of time that you spend planning your session in between sessions. If you have to prep, let's say, 2 combat encounters that are going to involve multiple elements and something you have to interact with like that, or even different rooms or different buildings, things that you have to draw and shape out and all those things, it's probably going to double the amount of time that you spend on session prep.
Yeah, even if you're going out and like getting battle maps online, you still have to figure out, all right, so this is where this fits in, like where the campaign will be. This is about where they'll get there. This is where they're going to come in from. You're going to have to plan out the whole, well, not the whole combat, but the beginning stages of that combat in your prep. And if you're just doing theater of the mind, you don't need any of that. You're just like, all right, they're in this throne room. It's got some doors. There's a candelabra that I'll talk about that they can shoot the rope if they want to drop it on somebody, and that thing will be appropriately placed to hit at least one of them.
Yeah, it's a game changer, and you have to get used to adapting when you do theater of the mind as a DM. You're going to have to improv a little bit more, and you're going to have to be prepared to provide some options to your players when they get in that scenario and they're like, well, I want to do something creative. Yeah, I mean, you're going to have to think of that beforehand a little bit, and you might have to adapt, and it's not all explained on the board for them to be able to do those creative things. But that becomes easy once you've DM'd for just a little while.
Yeah.
Like once you've done 10 sessions, you're going to be able to do those kinds of adaptions on the fly, and it's not going to be a big deal. And prepping never gets easier. Like prepping a battle mat is always an endeavor.
Mm-hmm.
So in the progression of a narrative experience, we still want to be able to have like some tactical elements.
Mm-hmm.
And so cover.
I think my initial thought is I kind of like the idea of like a take cover action, because like a room will have some amount of cover in it. You, an adventurer, can probably find some stuff that maybe a normal person couldn't use as cover, but you can, something like that. But you take the take cover action, like you used to be able to fight defensively in 3.5 or Pathfinder. So you get down, you can't, I don't know, attack somebody except for at range. Maybe it only applies to one person at a time. I don't know exactly what the mechanics could be, but I like the idea of, all right, what's my action this turn? I'm taking cover, and then I get some mechanical benefit from taking cover, and I can use that somehow to affect the battle.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a great option. If take cover is an action, that's a great thing to add to our expert.
Oh, yeah.
As one of his unique bonus actions, which is great that it is he has a quick action, make a skill check, as that's what we had it right now as, but we've talked about it having utility options. It would be interesting if the expert could quick action, take cover. I don't know if that's going to be too strong.
I don't know. It depends on how good we make take cover, but it does feel like a thing an expert ought to be able to do.
It fits with the rogue-ish theme.
Yeah, it's I'm really good at getting out of the way and still stabbing you on that first round of combat.
Yeah, and so if take cover is an action, will it be something that you like spells? Is that something that you have to maintain with anything, or is it assumed you are in cover?
I think you're probably in cover until you move.
In cover until you move, but you could still attack. I think so too. So even someone like a fighter who's using ranged weapons, or a ranger who came from the fighter tree that wouldn't have maybe it as a quick action option, they can take an action and then on the next turn start firing from cover.
I mean, they'll have a bonus action attack, so they could take cover as an action and use their quick action attack to fire a bow at somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that
it just depends on what. Are you better at like really getting an attack off way quicker, or are you good at like finding cover really quickly and then regular shooting?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to handle it. And then I think the only thing that goes with that is discussing range for orientation. Like since we can't do 3-dimensional orientation in Theater of the Mind, which is one of the challenges of Theater of the Mind in D&D. It is a 3-dimensional game.
Yeah, it's second levels and flying enemies, and
yeah, it's designed to be 3-dimensional. And so if we orient through ranges rather than like feet.
Yeah, it's was it the Critical Role game that they made? I read something about like But anyway, they mentioned something about like having a close range. And I think if we just have like near, close, far, and then have vague distances associated with those.
I really think we just need 3 for combat.
Yeah.
Yeah. If we have what is essentially within reach or melee or whatever.
Yeah.
And then, a close and then a far, that should cover it. And would allow us to orient other rules like cover in relation to them. Like if someone's in melee with you, you can't get cover from them.
No, it's you. They're just going to reach over and whack you, but you have cover from anything from close to far, mid to far range, or whatever we decide to call them.
Yeah. I think we might have to discuss. We also might want cover. Like if we have multiple enemies.
Let's think about like what cover does. Like,
okay,
it's designed to like stop people being able to like shoot at you.
Yes.
So it should block line of effect. So like hiding behind a brick wall versus hiding behind a shrubbery.
Yeah. Well, I think we could have either tiers of cover, since we use tiers in
anyway.
everything. We could have tiers of cover, and so we could make, and I know that this is might be weird, but we could make it to where basic attacks, let's say you have tier 1 cover. So maybe a basic attack goes from an auto hit to something you have to challenge. Do we want, I don't love that, but it seems logical. But I don't really like. But
maybe the cover is like just some small amount of damage reduction.
Could be that.
Like you are behind a bush. It's not great, but the bush does get in the way of you getting hit.
So tier 1, let's say a tier 1 cover will reduce damage by X amount.
Yeah.
We'll figure out what that is. Tier 2 cover could reduce damage by a higher amount.
Yeah, it's X times 2 amount or whatever.
Yeah. And then one of the tiers, I don't know if we want 4 tiers of cover, but one of the tiers of cover, maybe tier 3 cover, just means that you don't have line of effect at all. So you can't make a basic attack at them.
Okay, yeah, tier 1 provides some small amount of damage reduction, and then tier 2 and up just break line of effect. You can't hit them with melee at all. Or can't hit them with ranged at all.
Oh, yeah, that could be.
So it never works against melee attacks.
Yeah, obviously, if you're in melee range, then cover doesn't work.
Yeah, so doesn't work against melee attacks. Tier 1 cover reduces damage.
Tier 2 cover, I think what tier 2 cover should do is it prevents targeted ranged attacks from being made at you.
Okay.
But you still can get hit by AoE.
Tier 3 cover.
Tier 3 cover would mean that you are either AoE can't hit you or AoE has like heavily reduced damage.
Yeah, it's light cover, half cover, and full cover, basically.
Essentially. So tier 3 should start to affect spells or things that might
fireballs,
things that would hit you with an
cover AoE effect.
It's just preventing that altogether. Which also means we'll have to have rules for cover destruction.
Which would be nice.
Yeah, I think we have to have that, because then you could, instead of targeting the person, even if it's tier 1 or 2, you could target the cover.
And break it and get rid of the cover. Like if you have, a stone breaker ability or whatever, like a dwarf.
Yeah. Well, I think anyone could probably affect it to some extent, but some people might have something that allows them to...
Extra effective.
Yeah.
Like it's particularly effective for me to not bother trying to get around the cover. I'll just break it because I can do it in 1 or 2 turns, and then it's gone and nobody can use it anymore.
Yeah.
And that'll give us opportunity to put like Pavis shields and stuff in there, like what medieval archers used to advance on castle walls with.
Oh, yeah.
They're like big, like one person carries this big, like 5x5 shield, and it's just like an archer barrier. And one guy carries it, and archers hide behind it and pop up over and shoot. But it's a way to advance a light fortification up to a castle wall under arrow fire.
Yeah, that's super cool. That's super cool. And that, man,
and that's just not a thing you can really mechanically simulate in D&D. I mean, 5e doesn't even have tower shields in it, for God's sakes.
Yeah, you just have +2 to AC.
You have one kind of shield, which is lame.
Man, isn't that wild that we want to do a theater of the mind game that's going to have actually tactical options that aren't available in D&D?
That's the way, buddy. This was the way.
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea of somebody can't make attacks. They're dedicated to carrying a fortification that protects everyone.
Yeah, it's this item lets you spend your action to give cover.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you take the take cover action while holding this shield, everybody else adjacent to you can benefit from this cover.
Yeah. Yeah, everyone adjacent. Yeah, man, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and we'll probably use the same terminology. Well, maybe not adjacent, but whatever is melee.
Yeah, melee.
Everyone
in range.
Everyone in melee can use this to gain cover. Which would probably include enemies too.
Yeah.
Because if you're holding it and they're on the other side of it, they also have cover.
Yeah, it's hard to shoot around a wall you're holding.
Yeah. Probably have like a bull rush action as well.
Yeah.
So instead of providing cover, you could
push through.
I like that.
Yeah, man. Juggernaut Barb with Pevis shield.
So what about readying an action to hit someone who is in cover when they go to hit you? Is that a type of thing we want to put in it so that cover isn't like absolutely dominant when you're in a ranged fight and one guy has cover and the other guy doesn't?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Because it's like, I mean, I want him to be dominant, but I also don't know that I want it to be like, you can't do it.
Yeah, it's like, hey, come up and hit me with a sword, you dickheads.
Yeah.
It's the only way to get me out of here. I'm dug in like a tick.
Yeah. I feel like you can do a lot less damage, but maybe you can't ready certain types of things, like more powerful things, but you could ready like a basic attack. So that you could at least poke at someone.
I haven't really given like a whole lot of thought to like readied actions and stuff yet, but I don't hate the concept in general. And that's a thing. If we do have readied actions, that's definitely a thing you could do with them.
Yeah, I like the idea of you can use your action to ready probably just basic attacks or maybe specific types of defensive spells. Like there might be things that you could ready. I don't know that I'd want to be able to ready.
I think any of those would just be like it may just be as simple as you take the readied action and it is assumed that you used it, but then you can use it as a reaction later. There's some opportunity cost, but it turns it for one round into a reaction ability instead.
Yeah. Well, and you could. Well, we've talked about our current design says that if you have a reaction, you can use it. So there isn't really any opportunity cost by using a reaction because you're not limited by the number of reactions you can take. Then again, we
still have you can only use one reaction once per turn. So like your barbarian's damage reduction can only be used once. But you could also do, if you have 3 different reactions, like you have a hellish rebuke and a damage reduction and a move, you could do all 3 of those, but you couldn't do any of them more than once.
True, but what I mean is if you have a readied action from a readied attack, it's a different reaction. So you're going to get to use it. You don't really lose anything, right? It's creating a new reaction for you to use, and you're not really losing your action because that action is just being delayed. It could
maybe
be,
it
could be that when you ready an action, so and this is going to be like, let's say, a basic attack. When you ready it, you have to provide a condition or something. And then if that condition isn't fulfilled, then you just lose the action. But if it is fulfilled, then you get to gain the benefit.
Okay.
I don't know if that's a good idea, but
we'd probably have to. There's two ways to go about that. We could codify it reasonably specifically, and like these are the kind of things you can do with the ready action, or we just like, all right, you have to just say what you're going to do, and the DM makes the call on whether it fits or not. And there's pros and cons to both of those.
I don't love the second option because that's weighty for a DM.
But it's also more complicated rules that we have to come up with that makes combat less streamlined if we go with the first option. So, well, since we have side-based combat, reaction or ready actions or held actions or whatever may do something different since we're doing side-based combat.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter. You all take your stuff in the same turn. So if you want to shoot and then wait for somebody to go shove that guy out from behind cover and then take your next attack, I don't know that there's anything stopping you from doing that.
Well, but you're all acting on the same turn. So you could just be like, all right, well, you're going to go first and try and get him out of cover.
Yes.
And then I will go.
So it may remove some of the need for that to begin with.
It might. But if no one can reach the cover in that first turn, like, then there might be an arguable benefit that says, all right, I want to ready my attack so that when he gets up to shoot or take an action, when he reveals himself, I'm going to hit him with a basic attack or whatever.
Yeah. And that may be a thing that, like, I don't know, fighters can do.
Yeah.
Like a soldier could probably do that, but a barbarian may not be able to. Or a ranger could just use his thing to ignore the cover and shoot him.
Yeah.
But I like the idea of like held actions and stuff. They've always been like super fun, but I don't know exactly how to implement them to get that feel we're looking for.
Yeah.
Because I think holding an action, while cool and tactical, also sort of like breaks immersion a little bit. Because like in 5e especially, it's like, all right, I'm going to take my action. It's going to cost my reaction when I use it. And if I do it for a spell, it's lost. I lose the spell slot. So I think it feels weird to me whenever I do that, 5e anyway. Not suboptimal, even though it usually is. It just feels weird in the middle of this knockdown, drag out fight that I'm just going, I'm waiting. I'm gonna get you while my broadsword buddy does the turbo Macarena in that other guy's face.
Yeah. Yeah, in theory, it sounds tactical, but I guess in application, it could be different. I don't know, though. Our game, I think, should be so much more streamlined that it won't feel like you've skipped your turn. And I think sometimes it does feel that way in D&D. If you hold an action, it kind of feels like you skipped your turn. And I guess that just comes down to implementation. It might be just something that we have to test and play and see how it feels. Because I don't want it to feel like that.
No, which is awful.
Yeah.
It's extremely frustrating.
But the faster that turns are, if you play a turn and feel like you didn't do a lot, it's less impactful when combat is quick. Like that doesn't feel as bad.
Yeah, and honestly, depending on how hard we make it to get tier 3 cover, it could just be that there's enough other abilities spread around that while being in cover is a pain in the ass to deal with, it's not insurmountable.
Yeah, I agree. I think tier 3 cover is probably going to be pretty rare. It's probably a constructed barricade most of the time.
You're hiding behind a battle rampart or something.
Something designed to be cover. It's generally the only thing that's
tier 3 cover.
Yeah, you can't stumble upon tier 3 cover regularly.
Yeah, I'm hiding behind a big rock. That is excellent tier 2 cover.
Yeah.
Unless it's a huge rock.
Yeah. Because I like the idea that, I think items, even consumables, because of so much stuff that we're making more simple, versus a normal game. I think instituting the use of consumables could be really interesting too. So something like not a frag grenade, but that kind of concept. Whatever fits into the theme of the game you're playing. Like if it's ancient fantasy, it's a, like an alchemist fire kind of thing.
Yeah, Greek fire is 2,500 years old.
Yeah. So a Molotov cocktail, like fighters might carry those, and in the case that someone's undercover, I'm going to throw a Molotov at it.
Yeah. It's see how you like that cover when you and it are on fire.
Yeah. And I think that that's a great solution. And the way that we're creating damage scaling, I think things like that could actually stay viable for longer periods of play.
Yeah, it's when you throw a 2d4 vial of alchemist fire in D&D against the 200 some odd hit point dragon, it feels underwhelming.
Yeah. Well, and you don't even have to get to that point, even well before it. When you're at honestly, by the time you're level 6 or 7,
as soon as extra attack comes online, worthless.
You're not interested in that.
Yeah, why would you be? It's objectively worse than shooting him with an arrow.
Yeah. And the reality of it is I think that's less immersive. If you're when we've played some futuristic games that actually had frag grenades and...
Oh man, that Star Wars 5e game we played was so good. So good with all its item granularity and stuff.
Yeah, that was incredible.
The consumables were so much better. It felt fun to use grenades and det packs
compared
and stuff
to when we
that.
did a futuristic 3.5 game. We had one that was set in World War II era, and you had frag grenades, and they were useless.
It was better for me to hit somebody with my big ass broadsword.
Yeah, and that doesn't feel right. If I have access to a grenade, I should want to use it when appropriate.
And in 3.5, it was no. Charge, rush, cleave. Yeah. This is better than any amount of damage you can do with anything short of an antimatter rifle.
Yeah. And I think that having consumable items that you can carry in a pack and use, again, becomes tactical and engaging and interesting. And you can, I think, effectively institute that within a narrative like a theater of the mind experience. Because you can say something and we might even add an extra tier of distance that could be real far.
Yeah, sight.
Yeah, real far.
Whatever the distance to the moon is. I can see it. It's really far away.
I didn't mean that. I meant a range that only certain types of ranged weapons or spells could reach.
Extra long range or something.
Extra long. You have to have a heavy crossbow.
Or a ballista or a trebuchet or a cannon.
Yeah, you have to have something that can hit at extra long distance.
War magic is probably that way.
Yeah.
It probably has it just changes to extra long range or whatever.
Yeah, so siege weaponry and war magic can hit extra long. But then you have something like the little an alchemist fire thing. It can hit an enemy only in close range, not in melee, but it can extend to close range. It can't hit far, which a bow could hit. A bow can hit close and far, but we might even remove because I've never liked the ways that you can make bows the right option for every single situation in 5e. I think actually it would be more fun if, as a ranger, you still have a reason to use your short sword.
Absolutely.
If you're in melee, I don't get a nerf to damage. I'm just using a melee weapon. And if we're talking about basic attacks, we can balance it so that your bow, unless it's magical, as long as they're both mundane, they pretty much do the same thing. And so when you're in close range, you're using melee, and that's far more immersive than, I took this feat so that I never use this sword I carry. It's actually still always a better option to, when the guy is standing in front of me, try and shoot him with my crossbow rather than pull out my sword and try and stab him. That's not immersive.
No, that's a very specific character archetype, which most people aren't going to play.
No, and I don't think we need to put that even in our game. The idea of I'm going to use my heavy crossbow in melee range when I could just pull out a sword and do the exact same thing?
Yeah.
Let's just simplify it. And that would mean that ranged weapons are used in close and far range, but not melee. And I think that that's cool too. At least it's more immersive. It's more realistic. It's closer to reality.
Well, so if I wanted the truthiest version, I'd probably say bows are useless in close range. But shooting somebody with a crossbow from 5 feet away is kind of like shooting them with a gun from 5 feet away.
No, I'm not saying it won't work. This is true. It will work. But in the way that rules work in games that we have played in the past, not only can you shoot someone who's standing next to you, you can then reload that crossbow.
Yeah,
and shoot
that
them
may
again.
be a thing. Like mundane crossbows only fire once a turn.
Yeah, maybe something like that's cool. Well, and just the idea of trying to reload a crossbow when someone's standing next to you. Also kind of not immersive.
Yeah, I really wish you'd stop trying to hit me with that sword while I get my winch out and try and crank this thing back.
You know what I mean? That doesn't fit right.
It's dashedly inconvenient.
Yeah. This is so inconsiderate. A gentleman's fight.
Excuse me, if you would wait over there while I try and shoot you again, I'd be most appreciative.
Yeah. So I think we should figure out some rules for that create a little more logic.
Mm-hmm.
And not that I want everything about the game to be fundamentally realistic, but there's some things that you can solve the lack of immersion and still keep things very, like, statistically equivalent.
Yeah.
Like, there's no need to min-max into this non-immersive build when instead you could hit someone with your crossbow and, okay, yeah, so maybe even you can fire once when they get into range, and maybe your crossbow does a little more damage than your sword, right? Because it's a heavy crossbow. But now you're going to set your crossbow down and pull your sword out.
That's your one chance to shoot that guy while you're up close.
Yeah, you shoot him, and then you pull out your sword, and now you're in melee.
Now you're in fighting with swords and stuff, because he's not going to just sit there and let you calmly reload your 300-pound draw crossbow that takes 10 seconds to crank back.
Yeah, I think that... But even if you have any crossbow that requires you to reach down and pull back the thing... doesn't make sense in
that's
melee.
A light crossbow. A heavy crossbow is going to have the stirrup and the separate like crank to it that you got to hook up.
A whole thing, and you have to put it down on your feet and stand on it. And
it's a big old pain in the ass to load and fire one of those. Trust me.
Yeah, so a thing that says you can remove the loading property.
No, that's a magic crossbow.
That's a magic crossbow.
Or it's one of the really, really lightweight crossbows that do almost no damage.
Yeah, I don't think that should be a feat. I think that should be magical. It makes more sense that it's magical.
You either have the strength of a hill giant to pull this thing back with 2 fingers, or you have a crank, or you have a magic crossbow.
Yeah.
2 out of 3 require superhuman ability.
Yeah. So I think that is a good fix to some of the weirdness with ranged.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we talked about, like, I don't know if we talked about it on the podcast, but we talked about it early in development about how we want like magic items to be like more granular and cooler. Like they have different tags and stuff, and those tags are important, and magic tags and stuff that you can add to certain.
Oh, yeah. I like the idea that we're not always hunting for +1, +2. Don't get me wrong. If you're playing a game,
this is my grandfather's sword. It has been passed down from generations, but I found a +1 sword in some goblin's basement, so I'm going to throw my grandfather's sword in the trash.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, is that more often than not in D&D, or any game like the Pathfinder, that you're hunting for the thing that's going to give you +2 hit, +2 damage. That's all that really matters. On occasion, or when you get into much higher levels, where you get into very rares and legendaries, you're going to get cool effects. But more often than not, when you're in uncommon and rare, you're just looking for a plus.
I really like how Baldur's Gate 3 did this, and every weapon has its short rest bonus action special ability. Oh, what incredible game design that was.
Yeah, and especially you can find uncommons that have unique unique once per short rest
like
abilities.
that bard sword I found that has you as an action, you can give anybody within 6 meters plus D4 to
bless. Essentially, it's not
or,
bless. It would stack with bless, but it's basically a bless. Or there's the absolute power hammer, which adds an attack that adds a D6 of force damage and knocks someone 6 meters away.
Yeah, but even the stuff like the longsword and rapier and stuff,
just regular weapons.
Like, they're like regular weapons, but they have like a flourish that you can do as a bonus action to knock them off balance. Or
I think that is really cool. I don't know if that's exactly something we can implement in our game.
It's not going to be exactly like that, but I love that concept of weapons have like special extra stuff they can do. It defines
them, because more often than not, unless you have a feat, right? Unless you get to where you have a feat that is specific to a type of weapon, it often makes no difference which weapon you pick.
Yeah.
You don't care. They all do the same thing. It's just a dice of damage.
Yeah, it's like, but how is this D6 weapon from this D6 weapon? One's a longsword and one's an axe.
Yeah. One's a short sword, one's a scimitar. They're the same thing.
Yeah, these weapons are,
but they both have
zero
finesse. They both
mechanical
have light.
difference.
Yeah, there's really no.
The greatest egregious example of this in 5e is the trident and the spear.
That's
the
awful.
Trident is just a spear that weighs more, is more expensive, and is a martial weapon.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just worse in every way.
Yeah. Oh, you wanted to do cool stuff and have a martial weapon? Because you like the aesthetic of a trident? Nah. You got to carry a spear. Like when I made a water themed warlock that worshipped a sea beast. And it was like, well, I don't want to carry a spear. I want to carry a trident. You can't. But it's mechanically the same.
They're identical.
Literally the same weapon. And it would be cooler if I had a trident.
Yeah, sorry. Rules say you can't do that, bro. Tridents are only for cool people that have full martial weapon proficiency.
And if anyone has full martial weapon proficiency, they're not using a trident.
Because none of the feats work on tridents. They're all for spears.
And they're D6, D8 weapons, which guaranteed, if you have martial proficiency, you can find something better.
Like a spear.
Like a spear. Or a quarterstaff, which is the same thing.
Disgraceful.
Yeah,
I don't want that. I want the cool super weapons like in Baldur's Gate 3.
Yeah, quarterstaff actually has a reason to pick it. It has less things you can do, but it knocks people prone.
Yeah, that trip mechanic is so nice.
Yeah.
When you don't have to be a Battlemaster fighter to trip somebody.
Yeah. Being able to be a monk carrying a quarterstaff who can use your action to knock someone prone and then flurry of blows them. Man, that's cool.
Talk about putting a hurt on somebody.
Yeah. That's cool. Anyway, as you can tell, we both love Baldur's Gate.
Yeah,
I know this dates this podcast as Baldur's Gate 3 just came out, but oh well.
People are going to be playing this game just like they played the first two. Mark my words.
Yeah. Yeah, I say it dates it, but like I can tell you now, it will become the most played game on Steam for me. Give it time. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's 500 hours. Here we come.
Yeah. Oh, that's... You mean warming up for 500 hours?
Well, I mean, if it's going to make it in the top 10, it's got to have more than 500 hours of playtime.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think this is the first time I've played a game and thought it's going to pass Skyrim for me.
Yep. Skyrim, Heroes of Might and Magic 5, Civilization 5.
Yeah.
The all-time greats of games I've spent too much time in.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to our regular scheduled content.
We'll stop girling over Larian.
But I think like we talked about the Star Wars game earlier, like its item customization mechanics and stuff were maybe not well designed, but really cool in theory, because it lets you I could have a blaster and you could have a blaster, and they could be the same blaster and they do totally different stuff mechanically.
Yeah, no, I will say, because when we played it, so they have to context this.
Yeah.
It was still in development. I don't know where they're at right now. And it might be primo stuff. Yeah. By the way, SW5E, if you ever want to check it out. It's really
best Star Wars game we've played that translates it into a tabletop RPG.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And you could probably like rework it for other space-themed games that aren't Star Wars, but it's fantastic.
I believe Dimension 20 did one with Brendan's mom's comic book universe.
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Brendan Lee Mulligan, the guy who runs that,
yes.
the DM for that, his mom wrote a comic book years ago, and they used the SW5E system to run that comic book universe for their scheduled game that season.
I haven't seen any space combat futuristic TTRPG system that would touch the depth that SW5E has.
Yeah, it's... cannot recommend enough. I wish somebody would make an official version of that.
Yeah.
So I could pay money for it.
Mm-hmm. It's really cool. But back to what I was saying, there were layers of it, at least at the time we played it, that might have been a bit much.
Yeah, I distinctly remember hating the ship combat system.
Yeah.
It was not... They just tacked a extra game onto the side of a good game.
Yeah.
To have that functionality, and they should have just not put it in there. I get why they did. Space combat's a big thing in Star Wars, but
whatever they had at the time we looked at, it wasn't working.
But the feel of like Jedi versus non-Jedi people was really well balanced, and the tech system was really nice.
Yeah, there was an incredible amount of options. I think they were still working on balancing some things. There was a few concepts.
It wasn't perfect, but it was really fun.
Yeah, no, it was fantastic, and I felt like I was playing a Star Wars game. That's for sure. Anyway, digressing a bunch, but whatever.
Hey, you gotta know where ideas come from, right?
Yeah, and they come from everywhere.
Can't never overlook anything. An idea can come from literally anywhere.
One of the best campaigns I ever made just came from a word I said in my head because I thought it was funny, and now I'm 4 or 5 sessions into it. It was supposed to just be a one-shot. I thought, Herb Gerblin, that sounds funny. And
drug-dealing goblins it is.
And now we're multiple sessions in. I've built a whole world because I thought something was funny. And so, if you're entertained by a thing,
it's probably good.
There's probably a way you can translate it into a story.
Let that be a lesson to you folks. We talked about spells. We talked about basic actions. We talked about some combat stuff.
So I think we've actually touched on the vast majority of combat at tier 1 and 2. There's still a lot of elements of probably tier 3 and tier 4 gameplay.
Yeah, but
that we haven't touched on.
Tier 3, tier 4 stuff is not going to be...
It won't be relevant for a while.
Yeah.
I would actually say we've handled most combat elements in tier 1 and 2. Save maybe really nailing down how you're going to determine who goes first and the factors that relate to that, and what qualifies as, say, like a surprise round.
Yeah. Well, we have some like nomenclature jargon stuff to suss out and exactly how we're going to have consistent verbiage throughout this whole project. But you and I know how it works.
Yeah, I think that we've discussed it. I think we want surprised to basically just mean that if you surprise them, it means whatever conditions we determine who goes first on.
If you're surprised, you go first.
Yeah.
Your side goes first if you surprise them.
Yeah, if you surprise them, you just go first. And since we're having a whole side go, you don't want to have someone skipping a turn. And in many cases, the surprise, what it means is when your turn comes up in initiative, it gets skipped. Well, in side-based combat, that's too much.
No.
That's the end of the combat.
Yeah, so it's just as simple as you surprise a creature, a group of creatures. You don't roll initiative. Your side just goes first.
Yeah, I think that's fair and simple. Now, the surprised scenario might affect certain skills that relate to it.
Yeah, like the expert or the sneak thief probably has a thing that takes advantage of that or is easier to get the surprise condition. But I think tactically that's really interesting because it's going to give incentive to your like non-stealthy characters or your non-dexterous characters or anybody who's slow and bad at initiative to try and set up ambushes so that they still get to go first.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I say, we've talked about having like averaging the group dexterity.
Yeah, you guys have to beat an average number as a group, something like that.
Yeah, which is going to make everyone dislike the guy who tanked dexterity.
Yeah, it's my dex is a 6, guys. I can't do it.
But, or in our case, a 1.
Yeah.
Because we're going to not have flat scores, or we're not going to have ability scores. We're just going to have modifiers, which a few other games, it sounds like, are doing as well that we've ran across. And I think it just makes more sense.
Yeah, the derived stat is a thing that should die.
Yeah, the only reason that they do it, virtually the only reason that it ever matters, other than in D&D, you have tied dexterity roll, or you're trying to figure out your push, pull, drag, carry. Other than that,
the number doesn't matter.
The number doesn't matter. Those are the 2 scenarios that I can think of in which you ever calculate them into any
what's
decision.
The actual score matter? Well, when you have an ability tie, which I think is probably just a homebrew rule that we use.
Yeah.
And how much push, pull, or drag carry weight do you have? Because your strength score matters at every number, not just the even ones.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's only the modifier that ever shows up anywhere.
Yeah. So just get rid of the number altogether.
Okay, so I think that's probably everything we need to cover for a combat encounter, right?
Yeah, I think for now, at least, any granularity beyond this, I think we're just going to have to get into gameplay and then be like, yeah, that doesn't work.
Yeah, it's like, oh, this was stupid. Or, oh, this was great. We definitely need to keep that. But I think like for most of like the broad strokes of combat, we have enough to play test that.
Yeah, and we have actually quite a bit more than we covered in this session. This was really more just wrapping up some of the things that we hadn't talked about.
Yeah.
So next time we can probably start working on one of the other pillars of encounters.
We've got combat, which we did. We've got downtime encounters. We have social encounters. And then we have discovery encounters, right?
Yes. Those are our 4 pillars, if you will, of how our gameplay is going to work.
And combat encounters are obviously like fights and stuff. Social encounters will be when you like try and talk to somebody or go shopping or...
Yeah, I think you had defined it as any dialogue where you are trying to gain something.
Yeah. It's if you want something from somebody else and you have to talk to them to do it, that's a social encounter.
Yes.
And then downtime encounters will be like, all right, I'm making camp. This is what I, am preparing camp, picking rations, building things.
And different classes will have features they can use in downtime to, well, like we talked about earlier, consumables in combat.
Mm-hmm.
If you have the capacity to craft them, like if you're a ranger or an artificer or
one of the smoke bombs or a poultice or a poison arrow or something like that.
Someone who has some alchemical capabilities. One of those classes that allows you to do that, you'll make those in downtime.
And then you have discovery, which is like traveling overland into new territory that isn't mapped, going into a dungeon, making an investigation to a murder scene, stuff like that.
Yeah, everything that could fall under the category of exploration or investigation.
Or learning or figuring out something new.
Yeah, like you're going to go to the library or you're going to go into a dungeon. Both a discovery encounter. Now, of course, the library scenario is most likely going to transition into a social encounter, whereas the dungeon is most likely going to transition into a combat encounter. But either way, you have a similar set of mechanics that will be your lead in to this other encounter. So we will discuss encounters. And I think you also were wanting to make a change to one of the classes.
Oh, yeah. We have the Mystic Magus cross class as the Sage, and I think I like Witch better. So we'll probably talk about that next time.
Figure out what on earth that means. All right. Well, see you guys next time.
Cool beans. Catch y'all on the flip side.